The last night in Elk Ridge, the town of Elk Ridge, Colorado, was a quiet and peaceful place. Surrounded by dense pine forests, the only event that drew attention was the annual autumn fair. However, this time, the approaching storm brought with it something far more terrifying. Sheriff Jessica Moore was finishing her evening patrol when she received a strange call from a remote ranch. On the other end, she heard gasps, screams, and hissing sounds before the connection was cut off. Jessica turned her vehicle around and headed there, unaware that this call would change her life forever. When she arrived at the ranch, she was greeted by silence and blood. The house was empty, but inside, there were two dead bodies, and signs of a struggle were evident. Suddenly, a bloodied man lunged out of the darkness. His eyes burned with an unnatural light, and his movements were sharp and aggressive. Jessica shot twice, but even after that, the body still twitched. Driven by instinct, she jumped back into her car and raced back to town. Meanwhile, at a teenage party in the center of Elk Ridge, the first infection occurred. One of the guests, a boy who had just returned from a walk in the woods, suddenly collapsed and then attacked his friends. Panic spread faster than help could be called. People began to flee, but those who were bitten transformed into attackers. Jessica arrived at the scene of chaos and barely managed to save student Mia Grant, who was desperately searching for her grandmother. Along with them was war veteran Aiden Carter, who organized a defense using his rifle. Soon, local mechanic Lucas Reed joined the group, driving up in a pickup truck and helping everyone escape from the epicenter of the events. The four of them found shelter in an old school on the outskirts of town. They managed to barricade the doors and buy some time. Mia, using her biology knowledge, began analyzing the behavior of the infected. She noticed that they didn't act like typical zombies. Their movements were coordinated, and they attacked in a more organized way. This led her to believe that the virus spreading was of artificial origin. Jessica remembered a laboratory nearby, where experiments with pathogens had been conducted a few years ago. The laboratory had supposedly been closed after a series of protests. Their only hope was to get there, find the source of the infection, and try to stop it. At dawn, they set off toward the laboratory. On the way, it was revealed that Lucas had been hiding bites that he had received during the city attack. When the infected attacked their group on the road, Lucas, driven by his instincts, revealed their location. He asked them to leave him behind, but it was too late. The infected broke through the barricades, and the heroes barely escaped. When they finally reached the laboratory, they found it filled with horrors. Inside, there were infected scientists who had mutated more than the regular ones. On the walls were notes about biological weapon experiments. Mia found a prototype antivirus, but to activate it, they needed to decrypt data on the main computer, located in an underground bunker. The group fought their way into the bunker, but that became their last battle. Aiden sacrificed himself to divert the infected crowd that had flooded the laboratory. Mia, activating the antivirus, realized that she herself was already infected. She asked Jessica to stop her before she transformed. Her last words were, "This is not the end. They will find a way to return." The laboratory self-destructed, but Jessica and Lucas, who miraculously survived, managed to escape. Elk Ridge burned, and the infected died one by one. But on the horizon, a new horror was already rising. Jessica knew that the fight was just beginning. Returning to the town, she transmitted a distress signal while sitting in the old police car. The sun was rising on the horizon, but its light brought no relief. Somewhere in the darkness of the forest, the familiar hissing sound could once again be heard. The sun rose above the charred ruins of Elk Ridge. Jessica sat behind the wheel of the police car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Her thoughts swirled between loss, fear, and a faint sense of hope. Lucas sat beside her, silently staring toward the forest. Their car was one of the few surviving vehicles in the town. "It's not going to end," he whispered, not turning his head. "I know," Jessica replied, starting the engine. They decided to leave Elk Ridge and head for Denver, hoping to find the military or other survivors. Along the way, They passed through destroyed houses, abandoned cars, and bodies lying on the roadside. But the worst part was that several times they spotted infected people who no longer resembled regular humans. Their bodies had mutated: longer limbs, sharp teeth, skin that glistened in the sunlight as if covered in something slimy. "They're changing," Jessica said, noticing one such creature that seemed to be watching them from a hill. "Something's wrong with this virus." "It's evolving," Lucas replied, checking the charge on his gun. After a few hours of driving, they reached the bridge that led to Denver. But the bridge was blocked, military barricades had been destroyed, and remnants of vehicles were burning. A tall radio tower nearby was emitting signals, but they were weak and intermittent. "There's someone there," Jessica said, pointing to a small building near the tower. As they got closer, a young man with a rifle ran out of the building. His face was gaunt, his eyes scared, but there was a spark in them. "Stop! Who are you?" he shouted, aiming his weapon. "Sheriff Jessica Moore. This is Lucas Reed DeWeer from Elk Ridge." "We're looking for survivors," Jessica replied, holding up her hands to show they weren't a threat. "Elk Ridge? It's all destroyed. How did you even survive?" He lowered his weapon but remained on edge. Their new acquaintance introduced himself as Elias, an engineer who had worked at a laboratory near the city. He explained that the virus responsible for the apocalypse had been created for military purposes. Its aim wasn't just to destroy, but to adapt. But the main issue was the new level of mutants who were now organizing into groups. "I've seen them," Elias said quietly, looking at the ground. "They're smart. They coordinate through some kind of signal. If we don't figure out how to stop this, it's all over." Elias led Jessica and Lucas to a room filled with monitors where he tracked the activity of the infected. On one of the screens, a red dot glowed. "That's them. Their leader. They call him Alpha. He's stronger and smarter than the others. As long as he's alive, the infected will coordinate," Elias said. "How do we kill him?" Jessica asked. "I created a prototype weapon that blocks their signals. But to activate it, we need to get close enough to Alpha." "Then we'll do it," Jessica said firmly, looking at Lucas. The journey to Alpha's location was dangerous. They had to make their way through forests filled with infected. Several times, they stopped, hiding in abandoned houses. The infected had become more aggressive at night, their eyes glowing like animals, and their movements were incredibly fast. When they reached the abandoned factory where Elias said Alpha was, they realized it was a trap. The infected surrounded them from all sides. Alpha turned out to be a huge creature with a terrifying black spine, looking like shattered bone fragments. Its voice was strange, mixed with wheezing, but it commanded its soldiers clearly. "They hear us!" Elias shouted, trying to activate the device. Jessica and Lucas fought until the end, using all their ammunition and improvised weapons. Elias managed to activate the device, and the infected began to fall one by one, but Alpha remained unmoved. It lunged at Jessica, and only Lucas's final shot to the monster's head saved her. When Alpha fell, the infected in the area stopped moving. But this was only a local victory. Elias explained that the device had limited effect, and Alpha wasn't the only one. There were other leaders, and the virus wouldn't stop until its source was found. "So what now?" Lucas asked, breathing heavily. "We move on," Jessica replied. "We'll find other survivors, eliminate every one of these Alphas, or this world will be theirs forever." With the factory smoldering behind them, they set off on a new journey. The sun was rising again, but it no longer brought peace. This was the beginning of a new fight for survival. The hunt for Alpha 3 days of traveling had exhausted Jessica, Lucas, and Elias. Their car broke down in the middle of the desert, and they had to continue on foot. Their food supplies were running low, and the infected were appearing even in the most remote corners. Jessica knew that destroying one Alpha was only the beginning. Their next step was to find the base where the virus was created and stop it at its source. On the 4th day, they reached a small abandoned town. In the center stood an old fire station. Its tall walls and garage doors seemed like the perfect place for a rest. Inside, they found some leftover provisions, an old radio receiver, and a map of the region. Elias sat at the table, studying the map. His fingers traced the lines leading to a large mark in the northeast. "Here it is," he said. "The Prometheus Laboratory. This is where it all began." "How far?" Jessica asked, wiping blood from her knife. 2 days on foot, unless we find transportation." Lucas glanced out the window. He noticed the infected were starting to move through the streets of the town. They were silent, but their movements were well coordinated. "We don't have 2 days," he said. "We've already drawn their attention." Meeting new survivors that night, as they were preparing to leave the fire station, the sound of engines rumbled from beyond the horizon. The three of them hid, expecting yet another danger. However, instead of the infected, a group of people entered the town, armed to the teeth. It was a small convoy of 5 vehicles. Jessica stepped forward with her hands raised. She was accompanied by Lucas and Elias. One of the newcomers, a tall man with a rough face, got out of a vehicle and aimed a shotgun at them. "Who are you? And why are you here?" he asked. "Sheriff Jessica Moore. We're looking for the Prometheus Laboratory." "It's the only chance to stop this nightmare," she said. The man exchanged looks with the others. His name was Mark Henderson, and he was the leader of a small group of survivors. They had been hunting the infected for months, trying to find a way to protect their families. Jessica told them about Alpha and how they had destroyed one of the leaders. After hearing this, Mark agreed to help. "If we're going to do this, it'll be together," he said. "I have people, equipment, and weapons. But I want to be sure you know what you're getting into." "We know," Jessica replied, her eyes burning with determination. The next day, the convoy set off for the laboratory. They had to fight their way through territories filled with the infected. Some of them resembled regular humans, but more and more mutated creatures, animal-like, appeared. Their speed and strength were terrifying. In one of the skirmishes, the group lost 2 of Mark's fighters. The infected attacked as if they knew all their weaknesses. Elias noticed that someone or something was coordinating these attacks. "They can sense us. They know where we're going," he said, as the group hid in an abandoned gas station. "Then we're close," Jessica replied. The Prometheus Laboratory turned out to be a huge underground complex hidden in the mountains. Getting in wasn't easy. The infected guarded it as if it were their home. The group broke through the outer perimeter but lost 3 more people. When they reached the main bunker, it became clear that something much worse awaited inside. A massive mutated creature appeared from the darkness. Its eyes were intelligent, and its voice, distorted but human. "You think you can stop this? You'll only prolong the suffering," it growled. This was a new Alpha, and it was stronger than all the previous ones. The battle lasted for hours. Mark died, sacrificing himself to blow up part of the complex. Jessica and Lucas reached the central computer, where Elias uploaded the antivirus activation code. As the system began to boot up, Alpha lunged at them. Lucas shielded Jessica, taking a fatal blow. At that moment, Elias finished the activation. Low-frequency radiation began to emanate from the bunker, destroying the infected. Jessica emerged to the surface, dragging the wounded Elias. The laboratory exploded, and the infected in the region fell like puppets without strings. However, this was only a partial victory. Elias said that the virus could have spread beyond the country, and even if there were no more infected, mutations could remain in the soil, water, and air. "This is just the beginning," he whispered before losing consciousness. Jessica stood on the hill, watching the dawn. She knew she would have to keep fighting, but now she was not alone. The memory of those who gave their lives for humanity's chance to survive remained with her. The world had changed forever, but she wasn't about to give up. 3 weeks had passed since the Prometheus laboratory explosion. Jessica, now alone, had been hiding in the mountains. The explosion destroyed most of the infected in the region, but the virus hadn't vanished. It continued to adapt and spread. Before disappearing after surgery, Elias had warned her, "What we stopped is just one of the threats. This isn't over." Jessica held an old military tablet she had found in the laboratory. It displayed a map of all the Prometheus Corporation laboratories scattered across the U.S. Each. The map marked another potential catastrophe. And although most of the bases had been destroyed or abandoned, a few places still emitted radio signals. Her next destination was a facility called Helios, located in the Arizona desert. If there was even the slightest chance to find a definitive cure for the virus, she had to try. The road to Arizona, Jessica found a partially ruined Jeep in an abandoned settlement and spent 2 days fixing it. She stocked up on everything she could find: canned goods, water, weapons, and ammunition. The road through the desert was difficult. Along the way, they encountered not only the infected but also other survivors who had become dangerous. One evening, when she stopped at an abandoned motel, a man emerged from the darkness. His appearance suggested that he had been traveling for a long time. He had thick dark hair, piercing eyes, and a small first aid kit attached to his belt. "Don't shoot," he said, raising his hands. Jessica, holding her shotgun at the ready, spoke. "What do you need?" "Just a little water. And maybe a conversation." "I haven't spoken to anyone in a long time," he replied. After a brief exchange, Jessica learned that his name was Adam, and he, too, was searching for the Helios facility. He had been a doctor in the past and hoped to find medicines or information in the lab that would help create an antivirus. "You won't do this alone," he said when he saw the map on her tablet. "I'm not planning to." "Are you with me?" Jessica asked. He nodded. On the way to Helios, as they traveled to Helios, they realized that the virus had not only mutated but had also become a tool for other humans. Small groups of survivors were using the infected as weapons. They lured others into traps, releasing mutants, and then looted the bodies. One time, their Jeep was ambushed. A group of armed people attacked, trying to force them out of the vehicle. But Jessica and Adam fought off the attackers, though they lost their transport. "This isn't just a zombie apocalypse," Adam said, wiping blood from his temple. "People are becoming worse than monsters." "We knew that even before the virus," Jessica replied flatly. They continued on foot, avoiding the infected and traps. Every day seemed like a test of survival. The Helios facility, after several days, they finally reached the coordinates marked on the map. The Helios laboratory was hidden underground and appeared abandoned, but inside, emergency lights were glowing. "Someone's here," Jessica whispered, checking her weapon. Inside, it was quiet, but the floor was covered in old blood. When they reached the central command point, monitors flickered to life. A middle-aged man's face appeared on the screens. "Welcome. You're very brave if you made it this far," he spoke. "Who are you?" Jessica asked. "My name is Dr. Grayson, and I'm the one who created this virus." The truth about the virus, Dr. Grayson explained that the virus was created as a biological weapon. His goal was to eliminate enemies without using a traditional army. However, after the initial testing, it became clear that the virus was uncontrollable. Grayson explained that he infected himself to understand how to stop it. "I am the last alpha," he said. "If you destroy me, the infected will lose all coordination. But that won't solve the problem. The mutations have already spread worldwide. And how do we stop the mutations?" Adam asked. "The only way is to activate the self-destruct system in every laboratory. But that will kill anyone who survives near the infected." Jessica stood in silence. She knew this meant the end for many. But without it, the world was doomed. "If you're the alpha, you must do it yourself," she said, aiming her gun. Grayson smiled. "I will do it. But you'll have to run. You have 5 minutes." Jessica and Adam rushed out of the laboratory, fighting through the infected who had begun gathering around. When they reached the surface, Grayson activated the system. The explosion destroyed the laboratory and the infected within several miles. Jessica and Adam survived, but the world remained dangerous. They decided to find other laboratories to finish what they started. Each step they took was a step toward salvation, or the ultimate end of humanity.